Hi, I'm That Slavic Writer Guy, and today we're going to be talking about Tchaikovsky's Eugene Onegin, a three-act opera in which an incredibly self-important dipshit falls for the right girl only to be too full of himself to pursue it, kills his friend for an equally stupid reason, and then spends the next few years feeling like shit about it only to realize that he should feel even more like shit. The end. To find out how this excuse for an apricot even got made, Gremo Opera. Eugene Onegin premiered on March 29, 1879, roughly a year and a half after the composer got the idea for it. Back in 1877, one of his opera singers suggested to Tchaikovsky that Eugene Onegin, the lyric novel by Alexander Pushkin, would be a great idea for an opera to be composed to. And at first, Tchaikovsky dismissed it out of hand as not having enough of an actual plot to be even an opera. But later on, he reconsidered and reportedly spent a night thinking on it and then decided he was going to do the opera, as he admitted, not as an actual opera, but as just three lyrical scenes from the life of the fictional character Eugene Onegin. And so he finished it roughly 6 months later after he got the idea. And then, because he wanted to have full control over the original performance of it, he got the students from the Malay Theater in Moscow to do it first before premiering at the Bolshoi. The opera took about 10 years to be performed abroad outside of Russia, receiving its first premiere in Prague about 10 years after its original premiere in Russia. And then, really, not another 10 years after that till it was premiered in Vienna, and then really only being given at the Met in 1920. So it took a while for it to gain notoriety on the world stage. Also, Tchaikovsky originally thought when it premiered that the public might not like it because instead of an actual plot, the opera was, as I said, just three scenes from the life of Eugene Onegin and his unrequited love interest, Tatiana. Still, it is now relatively within the regular repertoire for Western opera companies insofar as Russian works are featured there. And um, it has some pretty good music, but it's also easy to see why, in my opinion, this opera is not more noteworthy than it might otherwise seem. Starting off with our cast of characters, we have the two eligible daughters of the Larin family, Tatiana, who is played by a soprano, and Olga, who is played by a contralto. We then have their mom, Madame Larina, who is a mezzo-soprano, Filipievna, also a mezzo-soprano, the nanny of Tatiana and Olga. Then moving on, we've got our two eligible bachelors, Vladimir Lensky, who is played by a tenor, and the title character Eugene Onegin, who is played by a baritone, giving us a very major hint that he is going to turn into an asshole throughout the plot of this opera. Finally, some more minor characters. We have Prince Gremin, who is played by a bass and does not show up until the third act. We also have Eugene's manservant, Zaretsky, a geezer Frenchman who shows up to sing a few verses of poetry at a party, and a guy named Gilliot, who is Eugene's manservant. And in addition to a bunch of chorus members being peasants and ballroom guests, so on and so forth, that is the full cast of Eugene Onegin. Act 1, Scene 1. We are at the country mansion of the Larine family, and Madame Larina is sitting there with the nanny, Filippina, and they are talking about Miss Larina's earlier loves and her own youth and marriage, and so on and so forth, while the two daughters are singing a love song. And then this idyll gets interrupted by a bunch of peasants who are celebrating something and who come out and sing in a chorus, which is quite frankly some of the best singing in the entire opera. After this, Lensky and Eugene Onegin are shown into the manor, and they're visiting from the capital, St. Petersburg, and they're shown in. And Lensky and Olga immediately are really warm to each other and flirtatious with each other, with Lensky expressing his true love for her. And Then meanwhile, Yevgeny basically kind of brags to Tatiana, who is the more cerebral, less outgoing of the two, that I really think I might kind of like you. And oh, by the way, I've come into a shit ton of money from my uncle dying. And so, just from this short conversation, Filippina, the nanny, goes, I really think that this young man has had an effect on Tatiana, and she thinks she might be in love. End of Act 1, Scene 1. Act 1, Scene 2. We are in Tatiana's bedroom, and she isn't really able to sleep, so she asks Filippina to tell her about her youth and early married life. And she thinks she might really be in love, and she starts talking about how much she loves Yevgeny. And she thinks that she's never going to feel about him like she would ever feel about any other man and all of that bullshit because she's probably young and full of hormones and doesn't really know what real love is. So then she spends the entire night pouring out her feelings and writing a letter saying how much she loves for Eugene. And this takes for fucking ever. I've seen this opera about 3 times, and I am a lover of opera, but it just goes on and on. Maybe because Tchaikovsky thought that Pushkin's original lyric poetry was so beautiful or something, but it takes forever until daylight comes and she gets her servant Filippina to come back in the room and take this off to be delivered to Eugene. End of Act 1, Scene 2, thank God. Act 1, Scene 3. We're back outside in the estate's gardens or wherever, and the peasants are singing again, and Tatiana is really excited because Eugene is going to call on her, and he basically shows up and is like, well, this letter was really beautiful and whatnot, but I don't think I'm really, really in love with you, and if you thought it was real love, you really should be less emotionally naive in the future, which I guess Eugene is kind of right, but still a dickish way to let a girl down. The servants and peasants are heard singing once again, yay! And Tatiana is crushed by Eugene striking her off. Act 2, Scene 1. We are at a ball in the Lorraine family's house, which takes place presumably sometime before Lenski and Olga's marriage, but somewhat after the original events of Tatiana thinking that Eugene is actually in love with her. And so, because it's a party, Eugene is dancing with Tatiana, and he gets really pissed off at some of the people gossiping in the party and wondering why, such a lush would even be invited to the party if he's forwardly dancing with Tatiana, despite the fact that he's not romantically interested in her. And this pisses Eugene off. He goes, "It's just a fucking dance, and what of it?" And so he decides to prove that it's just a fucking dance by asking Olga, the fiance of his best friend, to dance instead. And this really makes Lenski go ripshit. And then, as a result of that, both Olga and Eugene are like, it's just a fucking dance, and you're being a douchebag. I agree. And so she dances with Eugene again, just to kind of tell off her husband to be that he's being a dick. Then some French guy comes out and sings a bit of poetry in honor of Tatiana because it's being thrown in her honor because it is her name day. So basically the two really keep fighting over it's just a dance. Well, she's my fiance. How can the fuck can it be just a dance? And you're being a complete lush by dancing with the girl that you say you don't even love. And Eugene is like, gee, bro, it's just a fucking dance. But it escalates to the point where Lenski goes, well, if that's so, then you're not my friend anymore, and I challenge you to a duel because you're being forwarded with my bride-to-be. And, they're basically, are like, well, it's a duel now, so for our honor, you're on. And Tatiana is, once again, just sitting there and, like women do in operas, faints. Act 2, Scene 2, the duel. So Lenski is waiting for Eugene to show up with his second, And he takes this opportunity to wax on operatically about how his life has been, and that he doesn't fear death, and how much he loves Olga. And then Eugene finally shows up late with his valet, Gilio, as no one, his only second, to downplay all of this. And both of them are kind of like, yeah, this is really shitty that we have to go through with this, but seeing as though our honor now rests on it, we're both going to be too much of pussies to actually call it off, because this has been called for a completely bullshit reason. As Evgeny, kind of was like in the last scene, it's just a fucking dance, bro. But they're too much of pussies to call it off. And so then Eugene shoots Lenski dead, and that's the end of Act 2, Scene 1. Act 3, Scene 1. They are now at a ball somewhere in St. Petersburg, and Eugene has spent the last few years traveling around Europe and mostly feeling like shit about the fact that he killed his best friend. So, fresh off the boat back in Russia, he goes to this party to see what, and he sees Prince Germain and his wife, Tatiana, coming in, being the talk of the town, and Tatiana's being full of aristocratic poise and beauty and all that. And Eugene is like, holy shit, she really is a beautiful, noble woman, and I really might have fucked up in that area all those years ago. And this is double to boot when Prince Germain goes on about what a lovely wife Tatiana is to Eugene's face. And so he sends a letter to Tatiana saying that they really should be. Act 3, Scene 2. So they're in a much more quiet setting elsewhere in the palace where this ball is taking place. And Eugene and Tatiana get together, and Tatiana is like, oh my god, it's really you, and I really think I loved you once, but not anymore. And why the hell are you pursuing this after all these years? And he says, it's because I really have figured out that I love you. And she's like, well, I still really love you too after you were nothing but a dick to me. But I'm married now, and life goes on, and no matter how much Eugene begs her, she says no, and I'm married now, and that's that. And even if she still has real feelings for Eugene, and he keeps begging her, but she says, nope, gotta go be with my husband forever, leaving him even more in despair, having lost his best friend and the one good chance that he ever had in love ever. End of opera. So that's Eugene Onegin. Uh, it's one of the more wider performed works of Russian opera in the modern repertoire outside of Russia. It has its moments. I really especially enjoy the choral music in Act 1, Scene 1. But the rest of it just drags on, and maybe this is, again, as I suggested earlier, just down to the amazing poetry of Pushkin's original verse, which largely were retained in the opera. But because it really does have hardly anything resembling an actual plot, just a guy's a dick in multiple ways and then winds up feeling sorry about it at the end, it just seems like things take forever to happen. And there's no heroic story, there's no tragedy story, it's just this slice of life about this one guy being a dick. And again, it might be one of the operas that really is great if you hear it in the original Russian, and how beautiful the verse is, which largely also is how Tchaikovsky picks the actual scenes. How beautiful the verse would sound in Russia, but coming to at it as someone who only speaks basic Russian, it kind of just leaves me cold. But if you do go to see it, it's still recommended, again, for the choral music, and just to see some Russian opera, because this is likely to be your first introduction to the Russian repertoire. It certainly was with me. Um, uh, Go see it. But there is better Tchaikovsky out there, and much better Russian opera out there. If you want to see more Russian opera, definitely go see Muraskorsky. That would be my first recommendation. And yeah, so that has been Eugene Onegin by That Slavic Writer Guy. Me, like this or don't. Subscribe to it or don't. Fuck off or don't. I really don't care, because I'm me, and I'm going to continue to do this whenever the fuck I want anyway. And with that being said, и Slovenia na svidenia.